Good afternoon, everyone. You're all very welcome to this afternoon's live interview with Tim Davie, CBE, Director General of the BBC. I am Anne McGregor, Chief Executive of Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and I will be your host for today. I'm delighted to be joined by my co-host, Dame Rotha Johnston, CBE, Chair of Northern Ireland Screen. We're delighted to be broadcasting live from the fantastic Niavac studios, and hopefully in the not too distant future, we may be able to have some of you with us here. On behalf of Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce, thank you for joining us today. Our vision is for a vibrant and prosperous Northern Ireland where all businesses can thrive. And our purpose is to be at the heart of Northern Ireland business ecosystem, connecting our members with each other and the global network, helping them to realise their potential and achieve their ambition. Leadership is a recurring theme throughout that, and we're therefore honoured to welcome our special guest, Tim Davie. You're very welcome, Tim. During the interview today, led by Rotha, Tim will draw on his vast experience in the various leadership roles that he's held and outline his role at the helm of BBC. Outside work, Tim is a trustee of the Tate and the Royal Television Society. He is also a co-chairman of the Creative Industries Council. Tim was appointed CBE in 2018 for services to international trade, which is an area close to the Chamber's heart. And I will now hand over to Rotha to commence the interview.
Well, good afternoon, Tim, and thank you so much for being with us this afternoon in Northern Ireland, albeit virtually. As Anne's outlined, this series is about outstanding leaders, and as a leader of one of the largest broadcasting organisations in the world and in these islands, and we're very pleased for you to join us and to hear a little bit about your experience. You were appointed DG number 17 in September 2020. It's an organisation that's respected as the most important public sector broadcaster across the world. So maybe you could start at the beginning and tell us a little bit about your career and your journey to get to that post.
Well, thank you both, and it's a real privilege to speak to this group. Just in terms of kicking us off, I mean, my journey is one through a lot of commercial jobs, international jobs as well. So working in companies like Procter & Gamble, PepsiCo. So real cut and thrust commercial operations, which many of you listening to this and watching this will recognize as your day-to-day lives. And then really for family reasons, I was living in Connecticut. I decided to come home, but I also felt that there was something ticking inside me that I'd quite like to be involved in, something where there was a real purpose to what I was doing, and that's why I joined the BBC. And also, I've always had a passion for content, for programme making, and it all came together. So I joined the BBC board. It seems not long ago, but I'm now officially a veteran of 15 odd years. I joined in the marketing role. I then made a move to run all of our radio operations, our network radio operations, as director of what it was called audio and music, including our performing groups, which is a real honour and got very close to the craft of the BBC. I had a little interlude when we had a crisis, as ever the BBC serves up its fair share of crisis. So we had the Savile scandal that led to a resignation of one of our director generals, number 15, I believe, and that led to me being interim director general, getting a test run for this job for 6 months before going off to run our international businesses. We have alongside the license fee, that the BBC is a 5 billion revenue operation, 3.7 billion from the license fee. The rest is from our commercial arm, 1.4 billion now, because we've grown it, of our business called BBC Studios, which operates around the world. So that's what I was doing, and ended up, as you say, becoming number 17 in this job.
Thank you very, very much, Tim. Obviously, you've been in the post just 8 months in the middle of a pandemic. And we're going to get into this in a little bit more detail later, but what's been the most challenging issues for you to address in those first 8 months?
I think with all these jobs, it's trying to ensure that you're focused on the long term and making sure you're making the right strategic decisions, while there's so much to cope with day to day. This treadmill of operational issues in terms of how we cope with just getting productions on air, how the newsroom operates, are we keeping staff safe? I'm sure that people listening to this will have exactly the same challenges. Keeping it going day to day has been exhausting for us all. And for so many members of staff coping at home, getting the right work-life balance. For some of our staff have to come in to deliver things like news output. That's been really tough. But meanwhile, I do think the world is moving at such pace, and it's been a cliche that, but it happens to be true, that incidents like this accelerate the pace of change, the speed of transfer to an IP-led media market where everyone will recognize in their households they've got almost infinite choice. That's moving faster and faster. So you can't let up with and just say, look, I'll deal with strategy or the longer term things later on. So it's balancing that. I think that is not actually that different from day-to-day challenges for me, even outside COVID, which is what's important and being able to proportionalize, if that's a word, the issues, seeing what's genuinely a problem versus what's just a distraction, I think has been even more difficult during COVID.
Thank you, Tim. You touched there in terms of the sort of the leadership challenges and the complexities, both long-term, short-term issues. And I think Anne would like to pick up maybe now on some of the specific leadership challenges that you have faced. So I'm going to pass to Anne.
Hi again, Tim. In Northern Ireland, we have a small business base, and one of the things is, the leaders of the business sometimes, with the greatest respect, sometimes lack ambition. So leadership is something, or confidence actually. So leadership is something we try and promote seriously. So we'd like to know about your leadership style. How would you describe it? And throughout your career, what lessons have you learned from other leaders, good and bad?
I think we get so much advice through our careers on leadership, but one of the things that really has stuck with me is the simple things that people expect from leaders that then prompt growth, ambition, and critically happiness. I mean, I'm a really big believer that, one of my old bosses, to your second question, was, look, you've only got one life, make it count. Do something that really takes things forward. Don't just keep things going. And the things that really have resonated with me are, if you put these three things in place, then I think things begin to come together. And those three things are people clear on where you're heading and what is the goal? What's the narrative here? What are we trying to do? And that's obvious, but in so many incidences where I've looked at, let's just say, less strong, that's a diplomatic way of putting it, leadership, not everyone's utterly clear what they're trying to do. The second is, do people feel listened to? Are you getting the most from your staff? I really believe that, I can't stand this bureaucratic, over-engineered hierarchy. I think people just need to listen. Be very open to different views, and if you feel like you're being listened to, then I think you really can move organizations forward. The final thing is the quality of line management or the local experience, because it's all very well if I do a nice speech, but if in the BBC we have nearly 20,000 people, the reality for most people is their line manager, that small group of people that they're with day to day, really spending an enormous amount of time on that cultural change and how people act day to day. So there's not a disconnect through the organization. And I suppose one thing I'd say, to your second question as well, is what I've learned is, don't forget to be a human being. Don't forget to just talk straight, be direct. It's kind actually to call it as it is. And I'm not a big believer in dancing around the subject. I think we owe people, and our staff, our customers, everyone, the colleagues we work with, we owe them just to be direct and authentic and true with them. I think too much time is wasted on, frankly, kind of the more superficial elements of comms and positioning. Just talk straight. Just talk straight.
That's good to hear, actually. Sometimes my team would say I might talk too straight sometimes, but we certainly know the direction we're heading. Being Director General of the BBC is a really high-profile role, and you're going to be open to significant criticism. How do you handle this in terms of your own personal resilience, and how do you protect your team and keep them motivated?
Yeah, it's not a decision to take this job if you want a quiet life, and certainly my inbox and generally the noise around the BBC can be deafening. I think resilience is utterly critical in terms of my survival techniques. A couple of things. One is I do think proper time out as leaders. I mean, I'm a runner. I disappear off into the countryside completely alone and just have that time to reflect. I think it's really important, and I think everyone's got their own ways of doing that. But I do carve out time. The other thing is I mentioned that word about keeping things in proportion. The truth is that many things that are presented as crisis are not a real crisis. You know, what's a real crisis is, you know, the health of your family, making sure your staff are, you know, are happy in their job. So they're the kind of things you've really got to care about. Sometimes it's really important to say, look, that's important. It needs dealing with, but it's not a crisis. You know, frankly, so much is dressed up as, you know, existential. It's not. I mean, a real crisis for the BBC is not one particular politician or one short-term thing. It's whether we're relevant in a few years' time to every household. That's everything else is secondary. And I think really understanding what's important and what isn't keeps you whole in these things.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay, thanks. Back to me, Tim. So I just want to move on now to the challenges and the opportunities at the BBC as you see them. And in your inaugural speech in Cardiff, you set out 4 very clear priorities. Now, I'd just like to unpick each of those. The first of them, as you well know, is a renewed commitment to impartiality. And we see day and daily comments about the BBC's coverage of whether it's Brexit, climate change, and even politics in terms of being partial or impartial. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that and how you're dealing with that?
Well, I think one of the things I came to straight away within the BBC is that, look, it's an incredible privilege to ask every household in every town and village across Northern Ireland, across the whole of the UK, for £159.50 by law. That's one hell of a revenue model, and it's quite simple. You know, you can make this very complex, but if most households think they're getting really good value for money, then every other issue becomes secondary. So we looked very closely at what things do people value, what do they care about, and number one is, do I trust the BBC? And there'll be people here who run branded goods companies and, you know, services. At the end of the day, if people trust you, and they may see that you're not always perfect, but they know your intent, they understand it. That is the first priority. So for us, you know, there's plenty of partial media sources. It's getting more lively out there in terms of social media. I think these provoke massive questions about democracy, where it's heading. But in audience research, it's really clear. You often go to partial media, but you will value a trusted source. And we're not perfect, but our intent is really clear, is to work incredibly hard day to day to be fair and balanced and make sure that people feel the BBC is for them. And that is not negotiable. It's under massive pressure, by the way, in the world of social media. And, you know, this real noisy world we live in, the culture wars, all those things, I felt we really had to double down and say, no, we're really sticking to what we care about, which is impartiality. And that is absolutely the underpinnings of why you value the BBC. So
impartiality is if you want, the unique selling point of the BBC and its trusted nature, not only in the UK, but across the world. So what checks and balances do you have in place in terms of your leadership team to make sure that the output is impartial?
We've got an enormous amount of technical checks and balances. So the editorial guidelines of the BBC are very well developed over decades, actually, and are very fit for purpose. We keep them as a living, breathing set of guidelines. Everyone in the BBC is trained. We've got lots of those formal systems. The other thing we have is, I think we have a very vibrant and open debate about how we cover stories. What are we doing in terms of unearthing different views? You see, there's technical impartiality, which this audience will know only too well, which is, do we give make sure we're giving space for this party to articulate its point of view, or that party, political impartiality. I think there's something deeper which probably may resonate with more businesses, which is, are we making sure we're hearing from all of the people that may not be represented by a political party? They may have different. A lot of young people are not saying I'm, left or right. They may be more issues based. People may feel more distant. They may feel less metropolitan. They may say, actually, we identify more as a rural community, and you just don't get it. Mm-hmm. It's deeper than just. So I'm very, very comfortable with our robust technical. How do we cover an election? Who goes on the panels and all of that? We don't get it, again, we don't get it right all the time. We debate it. But I think there's something deeper in the modern society around making sure we're really unearthing different points of view. And that's what we've got to do.
Thank you, Tim. I want to move on then to the second priority, which was we will focus on unique, high impact content. What does that mean? And what does that mean? I know that today we've got a number of independent production companies tuning in to hear what you've got to say. What does that mean across the UK for the sector, the creative sector?
Yeah, I mean, one of the points you made was, okay, the impartiality is a unique selling point. I think if you pick two really big unique selling points of the BBC, aside from its overall intent and purposes, which are largely driven by societal good, and there's absolutely differentiating ourselves from others. The other thing is obviously the content, the programming. Why are we different? And I've been hopefully very open, which is, look, we're not going to beat Netflix in terms of the size of our budgets. We're not going to beat Amazon. What we need to do is be highly differentiated. So that does mean, from a Northern Ireland context, I'm sure we'll talk about that in more detail, but 680 hours of local programming on TV. It means 8,000 hours of locally generated radio content. I mean, I always kind of say to people, I'm not trying to kill Netflix. They do a great job. We do something different. But what we do need to do is, when this market is so competitive, and we all recognize it, you flop down exhausted on the sofa at the end of the day, you've got an infinite choice. What we need to do, and this is a bit the corporate jargon of high impact content, is we need to make sure we've got those programs that are locally relevant, that cut through, that make people say that is uniquely relevant to the BBC. Now that might be Newsline, and by the way, the audiences in the pandemic for news up 5%, 86%. Sorry, a bit of propaganda here. 86% of the whole UK going to news. I mean, we are really, really doing well in that area. But it also means dramas shot in Northern Ireland. I'm not going to reveal any spoilers for Line of Duty, but that's, and even I don't know who H is, by the way, just for the record. But that is the kind of thing the BBC can do. I think that others can't. And final point is, if you look at public service broadcasting in the UK, it delivers tens of thousands of hours. I think over 30,000 hours of locally made content. US streamers deliver just over 200. It's not criticism. We're just different shapes, and we need to make sure we can preserve that.
Thank you. I want to move on then to the third priority, where you state we will extract more from online. Now, is that about commercialisation, or is that more users? What exactly does that mean?
It's more about users. I mean, I think internationally we might want to touch on it, but I think there's great commercial potential for the BBC. We've been growing fast. We're an amazing brand, and some of the things we've talked about actually get more valid commercially. In the UK, though, it is primarily, overwhelmingly about how do you make sure that, thank goodness we've got the iPlayer, BBC Sounds, our news app. How do we make sure you're getting most value from that and what's relevant to you? It's an interesting balance for the BBC, because most businesses really drive their data towards full personalization, and we know what that looks like on a shopping site when you get recommended things that you may have bought and all of that. I think that the BBC's a nuanced position on this, which is we are trusted to bring, this is the big story and this is the view of the BBC is important, but I do think we could connect up more, make sure we're surfacing program. If you're particularly interested in a topic, or you want more programming, more of our local programming in your area, how can we surface that on iPlayer? How can we make sure you're getting as much value from the BBC? It's a simple strategy. We just think for £159, there's probably more out there than that would fit your needs. So surely in a digital world, digital can be a big friend to us rather than, you know, a threat. And that's what we've got to do. We just got to join ourselves up better so you get more from us. Simple as that.
Okay, and thank you. The last of the priorities was then in relation to building commercial income. So this maybe is an opportunity to talk a little bit whether that's overseas, because you've touched on that already in terms of BBC Worldwide, overseas, and in the UK. So is it both, or is it primarily overseas?
It's both, but primarily overseas, because you've got, I mean, for those the independent producers, everyone knows it's a complex market, because you basically when you're buying or making a natural history program, commissioning it, often 80% of the funding for some of our really big landmarks will come from outside the UK. So you're utterly it's more than just make something, then get some kind of commercial additions at the end of the pipeline, as it were, if that made sense. It's actually, in order to make some of these big dramas, in order to make probably all of our premium program now, we need co-production partners. We then need to sell that programming around the world as with those partners. It's complex. I mean, to give you an idea, the BBC is doing £500 million of business, just pure content sales around the world and content partnerships. Then we have channels. Then we have things like merchandise, productions. We've got offices in places like LA actually making formats. So, you know, there's a big old business there. I think the area for growth for us is around direct to consumer. And how far do we want to go? We've launched a service with ITV called BritBox in the States that's doing well. I think there's more room for us there. And you can see this, as this market moves, there's got to be more opportunity for the BBC to sell direct to people around the world.
Thank you. You talked there quite a lot about changing market and consumption. And you've also talked about the scale and the size of the BBC, over 20,000 staff, over 5 billion in terms of revenue. And you've outlined in various speeches and documents the need for radical reform, not just in terms of structure. I think you also talked about bureaucracy. I don't think you're a great believer in overly constructed businesses, and in terms of cultural reform. So, you know, again, a lot of the people listening in today are facing the same sorts of issues. Obviously, maybe not on the same scale as the BBC, but can you tell us a little bit about that and the approach you're taking to that? Yeah,
it's utterly central to any version of the BBC that I lead, in terms of, I mean, it is the old cliche that if everything becomes very hard if you haven't got the culture in the right place, largely impossible, I think. My approach is very clear articulation of what behaviours we expect, accountability, what kind of level of accountability, what kind of level of behaviours we expect. I mentioned that, but I've been talking a lot about kindness, but kindness is not soft. It's also about being direct, being very, very externally focused. So, you know, I think organisations can be really in a very dangerous place if they're spending all their time talking internally or constantly defining markets in too small a way, as opposed to, you know, we were obsessed with the UK broadcasting ecosystem, or whatever we call it. But meanwhile, the market changed completely with on-demand services. The internet, you know, takes away the distribution advantages of incumbent players. So I think culturally, you have to be very externally focused. I'm quite a big fan of healthy paranoia. Healthy paranoia. Unhealthy paranoia, by the way, is when you're kind of bitching, you're looking on each other, you spend a lot. What's the topic people talk about? I like healthy paranoia. I've really injected, I hope, into the BBC a sense that we don't have an inalienable right to exist. You know, we don't just sit here. We've got to be quite, you know, worried about giving you value as a householder, and you know, clear behaviour. Clear articulation of the jeopardy in a business, I think, really moves the culture along. Final thing I'd say is this is not a sport for you know, turning something around in 2 or 3 months. I think a lot of people in culture give themselves a big badge when they issue, here's our behaviour guidelines, our mission, our standards, and they all kind of, the senior team celebrate because we've got those standards agreed. I only really am interested in what the actual delivery of engagement in the ground and the measurement of that. So engagement scores, what actually happens statistically on the ground. So you don't give yourself a badge for agreeing the strategy. You give yourself a badge when you've really moved the culture around, and you can see that in your engagement scores or the level of diversity you've got in your team. You measure it and you're accountable for it, and your leaders know that. And that's what it's about.
You touched there in terms of the value of the BBC, and we hear the term sort of bandied around a lot about universality, meaning that the BBC has to be of value to everyone who pays for it. You talked about the £159.50.
Yep.
And I know that you've just mentioned it again today, you know, the BBC has no inalienable right to exist, and that you have also stated previously that you have a good, healthy paranoia about the sustainability of the model. You know, we see day and daily, or perhaps not day and daily, but very frequently, the issue of you know, the licence fee must go. We know the issues in terms of the payment of the over 75s. So is there an existential threat to the model of the BBC and the licence fee, or where do you see that going?
Well, in the medium term, so through to 27, 28, the licence fee is set, you know, in terms of as the mechanic. And I think the numbers today, where we're hitting 90% of people weekly, our research is pretty clear that actually today we have the metrics to justify a universal intervention. It is a strange old beast, isn't it, in terms of, you know, this universal charge, but actually in terms of the value we bring to households, currently it stacks up, and I think it stacks up for the medium term. And actually, from a charter point of view, it's set. So I think that's kind of where we are today. I think the values of that, by the way, I should say, we as the BBC, but I think more broadly, recognise that the strength of the UK creative industries, by the way, that are growing 4 times the rate of the economy. Pre-COVID, we were going to create 1 million jobs. In Northern Ireland, we've seen growth in the creative industries, these partnerships, where we know that talks to Northern Ireland Screen, all the things that are going on. This is really, really exciting as a growth play for the UK. And that is, it's not a random occurrence that we have public interventions like the BBC. So I think there's an utterly compelling case that the BBC is accretive to the creative industries, culturally important, economically good, but it's only as good as the value it delivers to households. So in answer to your question, I think for the foreseeable future, the licence fee is here. The big question for 27, 28, you know, there's a number of mechanics you could discuss around how you deliver universal payment. Is I believe, and the top team at the BBC, and I think everyone underneath us in the BBC believes that universality is worth fighting for. You can go to subscription, but when you go to subscription, you move to trying to satisfy your subscribers, and you're doing a different thing. I want to fight for universality because of what the benefits I think that brings both to individuals, households, but also society as a whole. So we're in the fight for universality. The mechanic, by the way, the licence fee, is in some ways a secondary question, but set to 27, 28.
Thank you. I want to turn then to the role of the BBC and beyond the United Kingdom. I think it's a fifth of the public purposes that states to reflect the United Kingdom as cultures and values to the world. Are you satisfied with the performance in the BBC's role at this point in time? Or does that change in the face of Brexit? Where do you think you're going with that?
Well, I'm fairly satisfied, like many of the things you've asked me today. I'm fairly satisfied, but fairly complex, but fairly ambitious, and very worried about complacency. So, look, the BBC gets to about 468 million people globally. It's growing, by the way. I mean, you know, the appetite for those trusted news sources, and it's different things going on here. I mean, I think that, you know, the statistics, like kind of half the population of Afghanistan get to us on radios and listen to the trust. You know, the World Service plays an incredible role for the BBC. I think there is very hard, good data that people actually who connect with the UK through the BBC are more likely to do business with the UK. All those things. There's a incredible benefits to growing the World Service, and you know, we've done a good job in partnership actually with the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office around funding language services. So look, I can tell a good story around where we're at. I think that case remains still very, very strong and potentially exciting as we look at our place in the world in terms of, us as a source of trusted news, trusted information. It's interesting, look at what happened to the US market. I think more and more people are coming to us to go to things like what we call reality check, what's actually happening. So look, I think we've got a big role to play. I'd like to see it grow over time. I think we're ambitious about the World Service and our international services. And by the way, this works not only through the World Service, but through our global commercial news business. And, maybe there's areas like subscription news in the US and other things that we can look to grow where there's a market where they've got money and the inclination, we can make some commercial revenue as well. So I think that all works together for me, and I'm pretty ambitious about it.
Okay, thank you. I'm keen to get on to talk about Northern Ireland, but before I do that, I want to touch on the issue of independence. And you've talked about working with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, etc., and overseas. In terms of independence, the licence fee, as you say, is a requirement for every household to pay. But in the period, I think it was in 2006, 2010 and 2015, the BBC agreed to settlements with the Treasury to take on costs totalling over £1 billion. And those agreements were made without consulting with those who pay for the BBC, the audience. So is that something we can expect more of, or how will that be dealt with going forward?
Well, I think you started at independence. So I think it's worth saying that obviously government quite properly and sets charter currently at 10 years, and then you've got the financial settlements. This is the midterm financial settlement we're in. But in terms of, it's just worth saying that editorially, we are fully independent, right? Zero interference. We do our stuff. And by the way, we take it in the neck from every single party on a regular basis because we're independent. And people like myself are ferociously protective of our editorial independence. And I think that's the very heart of the BBC. Everyone, by the way, will ascribe motive, write articles about how they feel we're doing, or ascribing intent around it. But the truth is, I think, the BBC at its heart, and I think many will know this that come close to us, is if you go and talk to the team leading the team in Northern Ireland, or they're really driven by that independence and that impartiality. I think you almost touched on a separate question to a point, which is, although they are very linked, is there a process by which we can, and by the way, the BBC does make the case that in real terms, our budgets have been cut by about 30% since 2010. And that's made it tougher for us to deliver value. We think we offer really good value. We think we should be invested in. But the process, it's really important we have a process where, the data, the public research, and by the way, this process where we're currently in the moment, is not just a closed room where we just have one or two meetings. It is us submitting our evidence pack to DCMS with a lot of consumer data, a lot of audience data. So I think we're in a better place. I think there'll always be a subject. It's a really good challenge, which is how we could make that even, as we look to the next charter, how do we get more involvement? How do we get audience views even further into the process? But it's a point well taken. I think it's work in progress, frankly.
Thank you, Tim. So then, as I've already said, I want to turn now to the BBC's role in Northern Ireland. Obviously, we've got a Northern Ireland audience today, so it's particularly important. So just as I suppose as an opener, how would you describe the contribution of the BBC to civic, cultural and economic life in Northern Ireland? Well, of course, I suppose in the context across the UK. I noted just earlier in the week, I think a KPMG report in terms of the BBC's economic contribution and multiplier effect to the economy in terms of every pound spent. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about that, maybe some of the larger investments there have been in Northern Ireland. Yeah,
and I think I'd say I'm very proud of where we are in terms of some of the partnerships, the investment, and the way we've delivered in Northern Ireland. But as it's a common theme now coming through this, which is I think we can keep working together. And by the way, your question of how we're doing in some ways is best answered by this audience more than myself. But I think that it does kind of link to some of the earlier conversation, which is in terms of our role, in terms of being a centre of outstanding journalism, proper reporting, doing our work. I was listening to the Radio Ulster this morning. I mean, doing that work flawlessly. That is the core business which we need to do and be valued by audiences alongside the dramas that we're doing. But then you slowly come out like the concentric circles of value that we provide. And I think we can be proud of where we're at, but we can keep going, which is, firstly, I think there is this sense of, it's utterly critical that we're driving the local creative economy. By the way, there's no version of the BBC where we're not putting money into independent companies. We've got, BBC Three network commissioner, Fiona Campbell, based in Belfast. We've got programs being commissioned with local indies, pilots. I think 40% of our local TV commissions now coming from the independent sector. We are a porous source of money, and we are catalytic in that. I think that's utterly critical. So I think we need we keep developing that. I mentioned the partnership, a long-term partnership, which we hope to extend over time with Northern Ireland Screen, which has been, and Rotha, this, but has been incredibly beneficial in getting projects located in Northern Ireland from a production standpoint, but also indies getting commissions in themselves. Then you've got a further thing as we go out, which is frankly locating productions in Northern Ireland. I mean, there's stuff that we do like Mastermind, which would be network productions, in Northern. So you've got the local stuff, then you've got network stuff, and then that gets exciting because it unlocks bigger money sometimes and really returning big contracts. So Mastermind with Clive Myrie now will be shot in Northern Ireland, as we know. Bloodlands Series 2 shooting. I mean, I could go on, but I think we're beginning to see, and the developments we've seen, again, I mentioned Northern Ireland Screen, but others with really developing. I mean, the Game of Thrones was so fundamental to Belfast, but I think there's a real sense that we can be part of a thriving creative community and develop together in that way. The BBC must be a strong partner, whether that's with, the orchestra, the Ulster Orchestra, or with libraries in Northern Ireland. That's a really important part of what we do.
Thank you. Well, it's great to hear that there are plans, and obviously I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about BBC partnership with Northern Ireland Screen. And content, of course, is the lifeblood of the creative industry, whether it's in Northern Ireland or elsewhere. Just to move for a moment onto the physical infrastructure in Northern Ireland, I think that the industry has had a couple of false dawns in terms of physical investment in Northern Ireland over 2 decades. I think there's been quite a lot of excitement. So, are there plans in the future, or where do you see the BBC's footprint being in Northern Ireland going forward? Do you anticipate a significant investment in the future?
Yeah, we will need to invest in the future. There's no doubt. We've said it, by the way. We've just, and we might want to talk about it. One of the things I really believe going forward is part of my strategy and our strategy, this idea of value to every audience wherever they are, is clearly the more you see yourself represented, you've got local representation, presence on the ground. It's the opposite of a strategy that's just looking for financial efficiency to get into one headquarters. You need to be out there. And by the way, we can talk about this, but we're pushing an enormous amount of money out into other, the nations beyond London, other nations beyond England, and that flow of it's about £700 million over the forthcoming period, next period of the license fee, and we expect about 60% of TV commissioning budget versus 50%, which is quite big in terms of network. But I'm off your question, actually, so let me just go to that now, which is in terms of our infrastructure. We've said we'll invest in that across the UK strategy. There's absolutely no doubt about it. We owe you a plan in terms of, particularly in Belfast, but also kind of our plans in terms of the buildings there. I think what is interesting is I think COVID begins to kind of shape some of our thinking around this, which is how do we make sure that whatever we do, we're partnering with players. I know there's exciting plans for Belfast Harbour Studios. There's all kinds of things. So I think we might, it's not just about a big shining headquarters. It's also about partnership, how we're working with other areas. Is there a more distributed model there where investment is going and partnering with people? So the short answer is watch this space. We are going to come with a plan for Belfast, and Peter Johnston, the director of Northern Ireland, and others are basically in the thick of it at the moment. So it's not too far away.
So just to put you on the spot, Tim, how big is this space? Are we talking months, years? How soon do we think this might happen?
A few months at most.
Thank you. I just want to turn then in terms of, we've touched in terms of the importance, and you've talked about the creativity, the ecology of the creativity landscape and working in collaboration. And as you know, there have been 2 partnership agreements with Northern Ireland Screen already, and your colleagues, Peter Johnston and colleagues in Northern Ireland, are working with colleagues in London on a 3rd partnership agreement. How important, and I see in your plan, the BBC's business plan for 2021 or 21-22 partnerships as a feature across the UK. How important are partnerships, and how does that help you develop, if you want, the creative sectors across the UK?
It's utterly critical. It's critical, and this is not just us doing something because it's kind of politically good. It's the only way that, if you're talking about the kind of scale we're all trying to get to and continue the UK being these world-class creative hubs, and Belfast absolutely as a world-class production hub. I think some of the expertise around journalism and current affairs are world-class, plus other areas. I mean, BBC Three now in terms of programming for younger people. You cannot do that alone. And it's more than that. I think that we know that creative industries, like some of the sectors of some of the people that are watching this, I'm sure, it's very difficult to do it alone, because the learnings about creative industries is they are about world-class clusters of expertise. They're not about single companies. They're often about, in Bristol, in natural history, we obviously are the kind of the anchor there, you could call it that, because of the natural history unit, but it's actually other companies have grown up around us. People have left us, which is kind of okay, mostly okay, and formed companies, built companies. And actually, I think there's a stat, I don't know how hard this is, so take it with a pinch of salt, but 80% of premium natural history programming is developed in a couple of square kilometres in Bristol. Now, when you come to things like Harbourside, Titanic, or all the things that have been developed around Belfast, we can't do it alone. The BBC, frankly, needs to be a catalyst. It needs to be a base in which we can develop skills. We may want to touch on that. I'm very interested in apprenticeships. I think the skill shortages across the creative industries. We should probably touch on that separately. We can't do it alone. We're a big old beast. But interestingly, the internet changes what you think of as scale. Yeah, and we must be in a position where we're growing things together. And partnering. And by the way, it's fantastic if Netflix bring a production into Northern Ireland. Absolutely fantastic. I'm cheering because I think it's good for bringing skills, for people developing jobs. And that's great. That's great. The BBC should absolutely be welcoming that with open arms. And by the way, I think there's a wider learning in business, which is there's definitely areas of competition, but there's also areas of collaboration and partnership, growing skills. And this idea of all boats rising in the tide, I've looked at it in the radio industry, I've looked at it in many sectors. Often you can spend a lot of energy fighting each other when really you could be growing a much bigger, choose your analogy, but just get the cake bigger. And Northern Ireland's got a lot of, make no mistake, as you know more than anyone, it's got a lot of potential to keep growing the creative industries and provide opportunities, skills, and that's really important. That's from a societal point of view. We need to get on the case here. Yeah.
Well, look, thank you. Regrettably, we're running out of time, and there's so much more I'd like to talk about in terms of skills that certainly Northern Ireland Screen is spending a lot of time on, and we will be working with your colleagues on that. We can't really talk about your new Northern Ireland board member you're recruiting, but we look forward to meeting them when they're appointed, and also to have that engagement with the Northern Ireland Committee and board members. But I just want to finish with one question to you, and I know that you're at more or less in the first 8 months of your role as Director General. But if you project forward to say 10, 20, whatever length of time, what legacy would you, Tim Davie, like to leave as Director General of the BBC? What would you like to be remembered for when that point comes?
I think that more than anything, I'd like people to feel the BBC is for them. Simple as that. If there's one measure, is the BBC for me? And I think we're in an age where institutions can feel distant and lacking in relevance. And I'd love at the end of my tenure to people, the BBC gets it. It's for me. It's for me. It's ours. It's ours. And it's important. And I think that's the main thing. I think there's something else, which is as a leader of an organization, I'd love to feel that we were an organization where all the opportunities of digital were captured, and we went through this whole revolution. And instead of it just being unpicking of a legacy business, actually we created an organization that feels very vibrant, very modern, very inclusive, diverse in all that means. And it feels fresh. And I'd love to be looking back. If I'm blessed with survival for that long, number 17, we'll see how long it goes. But yeah, that's that. In my job, you just enjoy every day as it comes as well, Rotha. I mean, the 10-year vision's great, but I think also you need to enjoy the ride as well.
Well, we wish you every success. Look, thank you. There's so much more we could have discussed, but we look forward to seeing you in person, we hope, in Belfast in the not too distant future. And
itching to come.
And in the meantime, we wish you every success with the major reform and success of the BBC. I'm going to pass to Anne.
Tim, if I had one ask, with all this digital work that you're talking about and international expertise and connections you have, Northern Ireland has some fabulous businesses, whether they're in cybersecurity or connected health or whatever. Any positive stories you can get out across the world about us would be much more welcome than the stories that are getting out there now. So I'll give you that challenge for your business journalists.
Thank you.
Thank you. That brings today's event to a close. And as Rotha said, we could talk much longer. I do hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. In a moment, there'll be a very short poll will pop up on your screen. If you wouldn't mind taking a moment to complete that, that would be appreciated. On behalf of the entire team at Northern Ireland Chamber, many thanks to the BBC and Tim for being with us today. I'd also like to mention Peter and Mark, who we work with very closely, who are great representatives of the BBC here in Northern Ireland. Rotha, thank you for being a brilliant host. And finally, thanks to our audience and guests for joining us today. Thank you.